The training hall smelled like recycled air and overconfidence, which, if you asked me, was a terrible combination. I stood there, all four of my arms crossed in what I hoped looked like an imposing stance, watching the new batch of recruits file in for their first day at the Galactic Combat Institute. 23 species represented. 23 different ways to disappoint me, and then there was the human. He walked in last, naturally, because humans had this irritating habit of making entrances. Not dramatic ones, mind you. Just late enough that everyone noticed. His name was Marcus Webb, according to my datapad, and he looked exactly like every other human I had ever seen. 2 arms, 2 legs, that weird flat face, and eyes that seemed to find humor in literally everything. I already hated him. Listen up. I barked, my translator chip working overtime to make sure every species present understood me. I am Combat Instructor Vrell, and for the next 6 cycles, I will be teaching you how not to die in hand-to-hand combat. Some of you will excel. Most of you will not. That is simply the way of things. The recruits stood at attention. Well, except for Webb, who was looking around the armory walls like he was shopping for furniture. Now, I continued, pacing in front of them with what I considered an intimidating stride. We will begin with basic weapon proficiency. Each species has natural advantages. Kralxi have 4 arms for multi-weapon combat. I gestured to myself proudly. Thorians have exoskeletons that make them living shields. Vespin can phase shift to avoid strikes entirely. You will each be assigned weapons that complement your biological strengths. Webb's hand shot up. I pretended not to see it. I had been teaching long enough to know that when a human raised their hand on the first day, nothing good followed. Yes, what is it, human Webb? I asked, my voice dripping with the kind of patience that was actually impatience wearing a disguise. Quick question, he said, and I could already hear the grin in his voice. Can I use 2 swords? The entire hall went quiet. Even the Vespin, who communicated through scent-based pheromones, seemed to pause their chemical chattering. 2 swords, I repeated slowly, as if maybe I had misheard him. You, with your 2 arms, want to dual-wield bladed weapons. Yeah, he said, nodding like this was the most reasonable request in the galaxy. 2 swords. You know, 1 in each hand. Slice and dice. The whole deal. I felt a headache forming behind my primary eyes. Humans did not get headaches, or so I had heard. This seemed deeply unfair. Human Webb, I said, forcing my voice to remain level, no species in recorded galactic history has successfully mastered dual-wielding bladed weapons in actual combat. The coordination required is, quite literally, beyond biological capability. It is a fantasy. A myth. Something that looks impressive in primitive entertainment broadcasts but has 0 practical application. So, that is a no, he asked. That is a no. Cool, he said, nodding thoughtfully. But, hypothetically, if someone could, would that be allowed? Several recruits were now making sounds that their translators identified as laughter. I was not laughing. I was reconsidering my career choices. It is not about allowance, I explained through gritted teeth. It is about physics. Biology. Neural pathways. Your species has 2 arms, yes, but they are not independent. Your brain cannot process 2 separate complex motor patterns simultaneously while also maintaining spatial awareness, threat assessment, and defensive positioning. You would, quite simply, chop your own legs off. Right, Webb said. But has a human ever tried it? No, I said flatly. Because humans possess survival instincts. So, technically, he continued, and I absolutely knew where this was going, you do not actually know that a human cannot do it. The other recruits were not even pretending to stand at attention anymore. The Thorian next to Webb, a massive creature named Kront, was making a rumbling sound that his translator indicated as amused approval. Even the Vespin were releasing what smelled like excitement pheromones. Human Webb, I said, my voice dropping to what I hoped sounded threatening, if you are volunteering to be a cautionary tale, I can arrange that. He shrugged. I am just saying, maybe we should test it before we declare it impossible. Scientific method and all that. I stared at him for a long moment. In my 17 years as an instructor, I had seen arrogance. I had seen stupidity. I had even seen the rare combination of both. But this was something different. This was a human looking at established facts and deciding they were more like suggestions. Fine, I said, a plan forming in my mind. Tomorrow, during live combat drills, you will demonstrate your theory. You will dual-wield training blades against a single opponent using a standard longsword. When you fail spectacularly, perhaps it will serve as a lesson to the others about the importance of respecting limitations. Webb smiled. Sounds good, instructor. Should I bring my own swords, or? The armory will provide equipment, I said coldly. Dismissed. The recruits filed out, chattering among themselves. Webb walked past me, still smiling that infuriating human smile, and I found myself wondering if I could request a transfer before tomorrow. That night, I did something I had not done in years. I researched humans. Not the standard military briefings, which mostly covered their alarming aggression and concerning durability, but their actual history. Their evolution. Their cultural development. What I found was deeply disturbing. Humans, it turned out, had spent most of their evolutionary history trying to kill things that were objectively better at killing than they were. They had invented thousands of ways to hit, stab, cut, shoot, and explode each other. Their entire civilization was basically a long exercise in creative violence. And they called it entertainment. More concerning, they had something their scientists called neuroplasticity. Their brains could, apparently, rewire themselves to learn new skills in ways that made most other species look neurologically rigid by comparison. They had musicians who could play multiple instruments simultaneously. They had athletes who performed what they called extreme sports, which seemed to translate as finding new and interesting ways to almost die, and they had, I discovered with growing dread, historical warriors who claimed to fight with 2 weapons. Gladiators. Samurai. Pirates. The records were inconsistent and clearly exaggerated, but the concept had existed in their culture for millennia. I closed my datapad and tried to convince myself that tomorrow would go exactly as planned. Webb would fumble. The blades would tangle. He would look foolish. Order would be restored. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that I was making a terrible mistake, told that voice to shut up. The next day arrived with the inevitability of a bureaucratic meeting, and I stood in the training arena watching Webb select his weapons. He picked 2 short swords, standard training blades with dulled edges and safety tips. His opponent was Kront, the Thorian, wielding a single longsword that looked appropriate for his massive frame. The other recruits formed a circle around the combat zone. I could smell anticipation in the air, literally, because the Vespin were releasing curiosity scent like it was going out of fashion. The rules are simple, I announced. First to land 3 solid strikes wins. Disabled safety protocols will prevent actual injury, but impacts will register. Begin when ready. Webb rolled his shoulders, adjusted his grip on both swords, and smiled at Kront. Ready when you are, big guy, he said. Kront charged, because Thorians believed that momentum was half the battle. Webb did something I had never seen before. He did not dodge left or right. He dropped low, sliding under Kront's strike, both blades held close to his body. As Kront passed over him, Webb twisted, bringing both swords up in a crossing pattern that caught the Thorian across both thigh joints. 2 points, human Webb, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The arena went completely silent. Kront turned, respect and surprise mingling in his expression. He approached more carefully this time, using proper defensive footwork. Webb matched him step for step, his swords moving in patterns that seemed, impossible as it sounded, coordinated. Independent but harmonious. Like watching someone write 2 different sentences with 2 different hands simultaneously, which, I remembered with a sinking feeling, some humans could actually do. The match lasted 4 more minutes. In that time, Webb demonstrated blade work that would have been impressive with a single weapon. With 2, it was bordering on supernatural. He did not just attack. He created zones of threat, using one blade to defend while the other probed for openings. He feinted with his left while his right struck true. He parried Kront's long sword with one blade and struck with the other in movements so fluid they looked choreographed. Final score, Webb 5, Kront 1. A human stood there, barely breathing hard, both swords held in what I now recognized as a proper dual-wielding stance. So, he said, looking directly at me with those insufferable human eyes, define cannot. The training hall erupted in noise. Every species present was talking at once, and I stood there, for arms hanging uselessly at my sides, watching my entire understanding of combat limitations crumble like a sandcastle in a supernova. Class dismissed, I said weakly. We will continue this tomorrow. As the recruits filed out, chattering excitedly, Webb walked past me again. Thanks for the opportunity, instructor, he said. This is going to be fun. I watched him go and realized something terrible. This was not going to be fun. This was going to completely upend decades of established combat doctrine. This was going to require rewriting training manuals. This was going to make me look like an idiot in front of the entire Galactic Combat Institute, and worst of all, I was actually curious to see what else humans could do. I hate curiosity. I did not sleep that night. Not because I physically could not, but because my brain refused to shut down. It just kept replaying that moment when Webb's 2 blades moved in perfect synchronization, like he had somehow convinced physics to take a day off. By morning, I had made 3 decisions. First, I was going to figure out how Webb did what he did. Second, I was going to make absolutely sure it was not just luck. Third, I was going to need significantly more stimulants to get through this teaching cycle. When I arrived at the training hall, I found something unexpected. Webb was already there, practicing alone in the corner with his two swords. But he was not just swinging them around randomly. He was moving through forms, patterns, sequences that looked like they had actual structure behind them. "You are here early," I said, announcing my presence. He did not startle, which was another annoying human trait. They had something called situational awareness that bordered on precognition. "Morning, instructor," he said, completing his sequence before turning to face me. Figured I should get some practice in before everyone shows up. Did not want yesterday to be a fluke. A fluke, I repeated. You believe that performance might have been accidental? Well, yeah, he said, sounding genuinely modest. I mean, Kront was probably going easy on me. First day sparring and all. Plus, I have been training with two swords since I was 14, so it would be pretty embarrassing if I could not pull it off. My secondary heart skipped a beat. You have been training for how long? 10 years, give or take, Webb said casually, like he had just admitted to having a mild hobby instead of dedicating a decade to mastering something the entire galactic community considered impossible. My grandfather taught me. He was really into old Earth martial arts. Eskrima, specifically. Filipino sword fighting. They used dual weapons a lot. I felt something shift in my understanding. This is a documented human fighting style. Oh yeah, Webb said, nodding enthusiastically. Humans have been dual-wielding for thousands of years. Swords, sticks, knives, you name it. I mean, sure, most military forces went with single-weapon systems for standardization, but the techniques never really went away. There are still schools teaching it all over Earth. And nobody, I said slowly, thought to mention this in any official human combat documentation. He shrugged. Probably did not seem important. Most humans in the military use ranged weapons anyway. Close combat is kind of a niche skill. Why, is this a big deal? I looked at him for a long moment. This human, this ridiculous, infuriating human, had just accidentally revealed that everything we knew about human combat limitations was incomplete at best and completely wrong at worst. Yes, human Webb, I said. This is a very big deal. The other recruits began filtering in, and I noticed something interesting. They were looking at Webb differently now. Not with mockery or dismissal, but with something that looked like respect mixed with healthy fear. Even the Vespin, who normally considered humans to be amusing but primitive, were keeping their distance. Today, I announced to the assembled class, we will be exploring unconventional combat techniques. Human Webb has demonstrated that certain fighting styles previously considered impractical may, in fact, have merit. We will be investigating this further. A Krauxie named Ven raised 2 of her 4 arms. Instructor, if humans can dual wield with only 2 arms, does that mean we should be quad wielding? It was a fair question. A terrifying question, but fair. That, I said carefully, is something we are going to test. Safely. With proper supervision. And extensive medical support standing by. The next 2 hours were absolute chaos, but the organized kind. The kind where you learned things but also questioned your life choices. I had Webb demonstrate his techniques slowly, breaking down the mechanics of dual-blade combat. How he used rhythm to keep both weapons moving. How he created defensive zones. How he turned 2 separate tools into one coordinated system. Then I made a mistake. I asked him to spar against multiple opponents. He fought 3 recruits simultaneously, a Thorian, a Vespin, and a Krauxie, and he won. Not easily, and not without taking hits, but he adapted his style on the fly. Against multiple threats, his 2 blades became even more effective because he could engage separate opponents without turning his back on either one. By the time the session ended, half the class was trying to convince me to let them attempt dual wielding. The other half was taking detailed notes on human physiology. Instructor Vrell, said a voice behind me, and I turned to find Commander Thex standing in the observation gallery. Commander Thex was a Korthan, which meant she was tall, crystalline-skinned, and absolutely terrifying when she wanted to be. She also happened to run the entire Combat Institute. I was in so much trouble. Commander, I said, snapping to attention with all 4 arms. I did not realize you were observing today. I received several reports about yesterday's incident, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Reports that claimed a human recruit successfully demonstrated dual weapon mastery in live combat. I assumed there was some mistake. There was no mistake, Commander. She looked past me to where Webb was helping Kront practice a defensive transition with 2 training batons. This changes things, Instructor. Yes, Commander. I am aware. No, she said, and her crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. I do not think you are. If humans can do this, what else have we assumed was impossible? What other techniques exist in their combat history that we have dismissed as impractical? What happens when we start training other species in human methods? I felt a sinking sensation that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with realizing your entire career was about to become infinitely more complicated. Commander, are you suggesting we overhaul the combat curriculum? I am suggesting, she said, that we stop assuming limitations and start testing possibilities. And you, Instructor Vrell, are going to lead that initiative. Congratulations. You just became the Institute's first director of experimental combat techniques. But Commander, I have no experience with this kind of research. Neither did anyone else until approximately 30 seconds ago, she said. You will figure it out. Start with human web. Document everything. Then expand testing to other species. I want a full report in 3 cycles. She left before I could protest further, which was probably intentional. Commanders had a talent for strategic retreats disguised as busy schedules, turned back to the training floor and found Webb watching me with that expression humans got when they knew something was up but were waiting for you to explain it. Human Webb, I called out. A word, please. He jogged over, still holding both training swords. What is up, Instructor? Was that the commander? Are we in trouble? No, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Quite the opposite. It appears your little demonstration has attracted official attention. They want to study your techniques formally. Document them. Possibly integrate them into standard training. His eyes went wide. Seriously? They want to teach other aliens how to fight like humans? Apparently so. Which means you and I will be spending a great deal of time together over the next several cycles. I will need you to demonstrate every technique you know, explain the theory behind it, and help me understand how human physiology makes this possible. Wow, he said, looking genuinely stunned. I just wanted to use 2 swords because it looked cool. I did not mean to start a whole thing. I felt something that might have been the beginning of respect forming in my mind. Or possibly indigestion. With humans, it was hard to tell. Human Webb, let me tell you something about your species. You people have a remarkable talent for accidentally revolutionizing things. You do not mean to. You just exist in a way that makes everyone else question their assumptions. It is simultaneously your greatest strength and most annoying quality. He grinned. I am going to choose to take that as a compliment. Take it however you wish, I said. But understand this. You just proved that the word cannot is less powerful than the question why not. That is going to have consequences far beyond this training hall. Over the following cycles, those consequences became apparent. Webb and I worked together documenting dual blade techniques. We tested them against different combat scenarios. We analyzed the biomechanics involved. And slowly, carefully, we began teaching other species how to adapt human fighting methods to their own physiology. The Kralxi, with their 4 arms, became absolutely terrifying once they learned proper multi-weapon coordination. The Vespin discovered that dual-wielding while phase-shifted created attack patterns that were nearly impossible to defend against. Even the Thorians, who everyone assumed were too large and rigid for finesse combat, developed their own version using paired warhammers, but more than that, something shifted in how the Institute approached training. Instead of telling recruits what they could not do, we started asking them what they wanted to try. Instead of limiting species to their presumed strengths, we encouraged them to explore their potential weaknesses and turn them into advantages. It all started because one human refused to accept cannot as an answer. The final day of the training cycle, I stood in front of the graduating class and felt something I had not experienced in years. Pride. You came here believing you knew your limitations, I said. You leave here understanding that limitations are often just untested assumptions. Some of you will go on to revolutionize combat doctrine in your home systems. Others will simply carry forward the lesson that impossible is a challenge, not a conclusion. Webb stood in the front row, now wearing the insignia of a certified combat instructor himself. He had decided to stay on at the Institute as a teaching assistant, which meant I would be seeing a lot more of him, was surprisingly okay with that. After the ceremony, he approached me with that familiar grin. So, Instructor, I have been thinking. That is rarely a good sign, I said, but without the hostility I would have used 6 cycles ago. What if we tried triple wielding, he asked. Like, 2 swords and a knife in your mouth? I saw it in an old Earth entertainment broadcast and it looked amazing. I stared at him. Human Webb, that is objectively the stupidest idea I have ever heard. So, we are going to test it? I sighed, all 4 arms drooping in resignation. Yes, Webb. We are going to test it. But when you stab yourself in the face, I am putting that in the official report. Fair enough, he said cheerfully. This is going to be awesome. As I watched him walk away, already planning his next impossible feat, I realized something important. Humans were not going to just integrate into galactic society. They were going to completely transform it, one absurd idea at a time, and somehow, against all logic and reason, I was looking forward to it. After all, someone had to make sure they did not accidentally revolutionize themselves into extinction. It might as well be me. Besides, I had already started drafting a proposal for a new course. Advanced Impossible Techniques, taught by Instructor Vrell and Assistant Instructor Webb. It would either be the greatest innovation in combat training history or the biggest disaster the Institute had ever seen. Knowing humans, it would probably be both, and that, I realized with something that might have been amusement, was exactly what made working with them so interesting. They did not just push boundaries. They pretended boundaries were polite suggestions and then walked straight through them while asking if anyone wanted snacks. Define cannot, indeed.